Welcome to Summer Shorts here on First Reading Podcast. The first reading passage that I am going to be focusing on for this Sunday, August 17th, actually there are two of them, Isaiah 5, 1 through 7, and Psalm 80, especially verses 8 through 19. Now, I like these two passages because they both make a very interesting case about the world in which we live using a metaphor. It's all metaphors, so stay with me. Now, let's begin with Isaiah chapter 5. The passage starts with an announcement of a song. Verse 1 says, "Let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard." That's quite romantic, to be honest. And clearly, the speaker wants to tell us something or a story about someone that they care deeply about. And as the story unfolds, we will come to see that the owner of this vineyard is God. Note in verse 2 that everything about the planting of this vineyard is deliberate. It's very deliberate. The soil is fertile. Stones on the soil are cleared, ready for planting. A watchtower is built to protect this vineyard, and a wine press is installed in anticipation for the harvest. Every detail, as the passage shows, clear attention and love. Then comes the turning point in verses 2b, which is very typical of most biblical passages, but also especially prophetic literature. The unexpected turn in verse 2 says, "He expected the vineyard to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes." Too bad. Now listen for the disappointment here. Verse 4, we hear God voicing the disappointment even more directly, which says, "What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done it?" What more is there that God could have done that he hadn't done already? And if there's anything or anyone to be faulted, clearly according to the passage, it is the vineyard. It's not God, because God has done everything possible to yield a bountiful harvest. And so expectedly, in verse 5, the tone of the passage changes. "I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its walls, and it shall be trampled." Hey, that sounds like an unpleasant scene. Could this be some kind of a punishment? Perhaps yes, but more so in my reading, it is more of a decision to stop protecting something that isn't producing what it is meant to be. Essentially, God is sort of withdrawing the investment that he's making into this plant. And so far, the passage has been speaking in, heavy metaphorical terms. The question still holds. Who is this vineyard? And what is this expected produce? It's a really good question. In verses 7 of Isaiah 5, the metaphor begins to be made plain. "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but he heard a cry." Clearly, Israel is his vineyard, and the produce that is expected is righteousness. But instead, God gets something completely different. I think that the poem sort of captures the kind of society that God longed to see, among Israel. But as we have seen, and I have repeated, it turns out to be something completely different. Now, hold that thought for a moment as we shift to Psalm 80. Because I see some points of dialogue and parallels. Verses 8 through 9 especially, it says, "You brought a vine out of Egypt. You cleared the ground. It took deep root and filled the land." It's a metaphor of the vine again. But notice the resonance with the Exodus motif in Exodus 14 and 15. Who do we know in Exodus that was brought out of Egypt? It's Israel, right? But this time in this metaphor, the voice isn't God's voice speaking. It's the people's voice, right? They are the ones remembering their planting. They recall how God moved them, made space for them, protected them, helped them flourish. They're looking back on that season of favor and rooting their current prayer right now in Psalm 80 in that memory. But like Isaiah 5, what's different here is God withdrawing from them, right? Why then have you broken down its walls, so that all who pass along the way pluck its fruit? This is verse 12, the people say. Do you hear the complaint in the voice of the people? They are clearly naming their vulnerability, but also naming their present situation, which is, we were once protected, we were once nurtured by you, God. But today, oh my God, you have taken your protection away. In fact, they ask what Isaiah 5 never lets the vineyard ask, which is the question of why. So while Isaiah gives us God's heartbreak, Psalm 80 gives us the people's confusion. And as we saw in Isaiah, it's God who says, what more could I have done? Here in Psalm 80, it's the people saying, why have you torn us down? There's on one side, there's this speech of an investment, a disappointment. And on the other, there's this speech of loss and pleading and prayer and petition. And if you ask me, I would say both perspectives are true. So maybe these two texts exist together in this lectionary today so that we are pushed to think very hard about the fractured space of mutual grief, mutual disappointment, where perhaps maybe divine hope and human memory meets in some kind of a metaphorical tension. Yet, grief is not the last word in this passage. The refrain that runs through Psalm 80 multiple times in verses 3, verses 7, verses 19 is a refrain more like a chorus. Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. In other words, God, whatever the reason for this ruin, please don't stay far. Don't go silent. Turn your face toward us. So maybe that's what these two passages are here to leave us with. They're here to leave us with the God who is grieved by what's grown, the vineyard that's planted that never yielded fruit, and the people who don't know where things went wrong, but they still want to be seen, they still want to be heard. And there's disappointment in both voices, like I've alluded to previously. But if we listen carefully, there's also a thread of hope. The vineyard might be wounded, but it's still speaking nonetheless. And the planter, who is God, we trust, is still very clearly listening. It's the plea of the people in Psalm 80. So these two passages clearly don't offer explanations to how things go, but they still make space for us to think very well about the kind of world that God is longing for and the kind of people that we are becoming. At least they help us name the space between God's hope and our response in a very honest way. And even more powerful in Psalm 80, it gives us the language for what to say when we feel the distance between us and God. And that language, I think, is beautiful, which is, restore us, O God of hosts, let your face shine that we may be saved. This is all I have for you today. Enjoy preaching. See you in another episode.